The question that disturbs your sleep. Have you ever stopped to wonder how close you are to the edge of your own moral cliff? Not the cliff you think other people live near. Not the one reserved for murderers and monsters and men in faraway prisons. Your cliff. The one that lives in the same heart that loves your mother. The same hands that have never struck anyone. The same mind that tells itself every single day, I am a good person. Picture this. You are sitting at your desk. The hum of daily life echoes in the background. The coffee is warm. The to-do list is long. Everything is ordinary. And then something happens. A situation you never anticipated. A pressure you never prepared for. A choice that arrives not with a bang, but with a whisper. And suddenly, the rules of decency no longer apply. Would you still be the saint you believe yourself to be? Or would you slide into that abyss, clawing and grasping at the walls as you fell? Here is the truth that psychology has proven beyond any reasonable doubt. The line between good and evil is not a fortress wall. It is not even a fence. It is a line drawn in wet sand, and the tide is always rising. God and the devil. These are the two fundamental patterns of human existence. The path of light. Good, truth, beauty, life, heaven, salvation. And the path of darkness. Evil, deception, betrayal, negation of life, hell, damnation. We all believe we walk the first path. We all believe the second belongs to someone else. But nothing is easier than to denounce the evildoer. Nothing is more difficult than understanding him. And the most terrifying realization of all is that the evildoer is not a stranger. He is not a monster. He is not the other. He is you. He is me. He is every person who has ever drawn breath and told themselves they would never become what they secretly fear they already are. When you point one finger at someone, 3 fingers point back at you. This is not a comfortable journey. It is not meant to be. Over the next several hours, we will descend into the experiments that shattered psychology's assumptions about human nature. We will enter the prisons where ordinary college students became sadists in 6 days. We will sit in the classrooms where teenagers begged to become Nazis. We will look into the eyes of doctors who killed their patients and neighbors who betrayed their own. But before we go anywhere, I need you to remember this moment. Right now, before the data, before the case studies, before the horror. Remember how confident you are that you would never become the monster. Because by the end of this journey, you might not be so sure anymore. And that doubt, that crack in your certainty, may be the only thing that saves you when your own moral cliff finally crumbles beneath your feet. The banality of evil. In 1961, a man sat inside a bulletproof glass booth in a courtroom in Jerusalem. He was not a giant, he was not a beast, he was not draped in horns or dripping with the blood of his victims. He was a middle-aged man with thinning hair, ill-fitting glasses, and a forehead that seemed permanently wrinkled in confusion. He looked like an accountant. He looked like a clerk. He looked like someone you would pass on the street and forget before you reached the next corner. His name was Adolf Eichmann, and he had been one of the chief architects of the Holocaust. Eichmann was responsible for the transportation of millions of Jews to concentration camps. He organized trains. He scheduled deportations. He calculated timetables. He filled out forms. And when the trains arrived at places like Auschwitz and Treblinka, the people inside were sent to their deaths. Not by Eichmann's own hand, not by his own gun, but by his own pen. His signatures, his approvals, his tireless, efficient, utterly ordinary work. The philosopher Hannah Arendt covered the trial for The New Yorker. She expected to find a monster. She expected to find a sadist. She expected to find a demonic figure whose evil would be so vast, so incomprehensible, that it would almost explain itself. Instead, she found Eichmann, a man who insisted he had done nothing wrong, a man who said he was simply following orders, a man who claimed he had no hatred for Jews, no bloodlust, no ideology beyond doing his job well. A man who, when asked if he had a conscience, said that his conscience now belonged to the Führer. And this, Arendt realized, was the most terrifying truth of all. She called it the banality of evil. Not the dramatic evil of Shakespearean villains, not the seductive evil of the devil himself, not the evil that cackles and twirls its mustache and announces its arrival with thunder and fire, the evil that sits at a desk, the evil that fills out paperwork, the evil that goes home to dinner, kisses its children goodnight, and sleeps soundly because it never once believed it was doing anything wrong. Nothing is easier than to denounce the evildoer. Nothing is more difficult than understanding him. We want evil to look like something. We want horns and fangs. We want a face we can hate, a name we can curse, a heart we can believe is fundamentally different from our own. But what if evil does not look like evil? What if it looks like obedience? What if it looks like efficiency? What if it looks like a man in a glass booth who seems more bored than brutal? Arendt wrote these words. The trouble with Eichmann was precisely that so many were like him, and that the many were neither perverted nor sadistic, that they were, and still are, terribly and terrifyingly normal. Normal! That is the word that should keep you awake at night. Because if Eichmann was normal, if the men who ran the concentration camps were normal, if the guards who tortured prisoners were normal, then what does that make you? The banality of evil means that evil does not announce itself. It does not ask for your permission. It does not require you to become a different person. It only requires you to stop asking questions. It only requires you to look at the form in front of you instead of the person behind it. It only requires you to believe with absolute certainty that you are one of the good ones. And that is how the ordinary becomes the monstrous. Not through malice, not through hatred, through paperwork, through obedience, through the quiet, comfortable, deadly assumption that someone else is in charge, someone else has made the decisions, someone else will carry the blame. Eichmann was not a devil, he was not a demon. He was a man who forgot how to think for himself. A man who traded his conscience for a promotion. A man who looked at millions of dead human beings and said, I was just doing my job. The question you must carry with you for the rest of this journey is not whether you are capable of evil. That question has already been answered. The question is whether you will recognize it when it comes for you. Not in the form of a monster, but in the form of a memo. You are not who you think you are. Here is a simple experiment you can run on yourself at any moment. Think of the last time you cut someone off in traffic. Perhaps you were late for an appointment. Perhaps you were stressed about a deadline. Perhaps the other driver was going too slowly and you had no choice. Now think of the last time someone cut you off in traffic. What did you think about that person? You see the pattern already. When we do something wrong, we explain it by our circumstances. I was tired. I was under pressure. I made a mistake. The situation forced my hand. But when someone else does something wrong, we explain it by their character. They are rude. They are aggressive. They are a bad person. This is called the fundamental attribution error. It is one of the most well-documented biases in all of psychology, and it operates in your mind every single day without your permission. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon for decades. In one classic experiment, participants were asked to read essays that argued for or against a particular political position. They were told that the essay writers had been assigned their positions by a coin flip. They were told explicitly that the writers did not choose what to argue. And yet, when asked to judge the true beliefs of the writers, the participants still assumed that those who wrote favorable essays actually supported the position, and those who wrote unfavorable essays opposed it. Even knowing the situation was forced, even knowing there was no choice, people could not stop themselves from seeing character where only circumstance existed. This is how we navigate the world. We see the homeless man on the street and assume he is lazy. We see the prisoner behind bars and assume he is evil. We see the person who disagrees with us and assume she is stupid or malicious. And we do all of this while giving ourselves a permanent, unlimited pass. I am good. You are bad. I have reasons. You have flaws. Now here is where this becomes dangerous. If you believe that evil only comes from evil people, you will never see it coming. You will walk through the world wearing blinders, convinced that the monster looks like a monster, that the villain knows he is a villain, that the line between good and evil is drawn once and forever at birth. And when your own situation begins to shift, when your own circumstances begin to press, when your own capacity for wrongdoing begins to stir, you will not recognize it because you do not believe it exists. The fundamental attribution error is not just a cognitive bias, it is a moral trap. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung understood this better than almost anyone. He wrote that when we merely identify ourselves with the good and deny our capacity for evil, we inevitably project it onto other people. It takes control of us as an autonomous power, often clearly visible to others, if not to us. The devil has the character of an autonomous personality, greater than man's consciousness and greater than his will. You will never integrate what you refuse to see. You will never resist what you refuse to believe is inside you. So here is the uncomfortable truth that must sit with you for the rest of this journey. You are not who you think you are. Not because you are secretly worse than you believe, but because you are more complicated, more contradictory, more capable of both the heights of heroism and the depths of cruelty than your comfortable self-image will ever admit. The only reality is that everyone is capable of evil. Everyone, including you, especially you. And the proper moral position is not pretending this is false. It is knowing evil, recognizing it within yourself, and choosing not to do it every single day, all over again. Milgram's shocking truth. In 1961, a psychologist at Yale University placed an advertisement in a local newspaper. He was looking for men to participate in a study on memory and learning. The pay was $4.50, equivalent to about $40 today. The participants were ordinary people: a plumber, an electrician, a high school teacher, a postal worker. They came from all walks of life, and they had no idea what was waiting for them inside the laboratory. The psychologist's name was Stanley Milgram, and he was about to discover something terrifying about human nature. Here is what the participants were told. They would be assigned the role of teacher. Another person, an affable middle-aged man, would be assigned the role of learner. The teacher would read a list of word pairs to the learner, then test his memory. Each time the learner made a mistake, the teacher would administer an electric shock. With each subsequent mistake, the shock would increase in voltage. The machine had 30 switches, labeled from 15 volts to 450 volts. The final switches were marked with a warning: XXX, danger, severe shock. The learner was strapped to a chair in another room. The teacher could hear him but not see him. The experimenter, a stern man in a grey lab coat, stood beside the teacher and instructed him to continue. What the participants did not know was that the learner was an actor. The shocks were not real. The entire setup was an elaborate simulation designed to answer one question: how far will an ordinary person go when an authority figure tells him to hurt another human being? The experiment began. The first shock was mild, 15 volts. The learner made another mistake, 30 volts, another, 45. At 75 volts, the learner began to complain. At 120 volts, he shouted that the shocks were becoming painful. At 150, he cried out, "Get me out of here, I refuse to go on." At 270 volts, he screamed in agony. At 300 volts, he pounded on the wall and begged for the experiment to stop. After that, he fell silent. And still, the experimenter in the grey lab coat said, "The experiment requires that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. What would you do?" Before you answer, know this. When Milgram asked psychiatrists, college students, and ordinary adults to predict their own behavior, they all said the same thing. Almost everyone would stop early. Only a tiny fraction, perhaps 1 or 2% of the population, would continue to the maximum voltage. The psychiatrist estimated that only 1 person in 1,000 was pathological enough to deliver the highest shock. They were wrong. 65% of participants continued all the way to 450 volts. 2 out of 3 ordinary men delivered what they believed to be a potentially lethal shock to a screaming, pleading, possibly dying stranger. Not because they were sadists, not because they enjoyed it, not because they were monsters, because a man in a lab coat told them to. Milgram described the behavior of one participant. He was a 31-year-old industrial engineer, polite, well-spoken, with a gentle demeanor. He began the experiment calmly. But as the learner screamed and fell silent, the engineer began to sweat. He laughed nervously. He turned to the experimenter and said, "I don't think I can go on." The experimenter replied, "The experiment requires that you continue." The engineer paused. He looked at the shock generator. He looked at the experimenter. And then he pressed the next switch. After the experiment, Milgram debriefed the participants. He asked them why they continued. They gave the same answer Eichmann had given in Jerusalem. "I was just following orders." Milgram wrote these words. Stark authority was pitted against the subject's strongest moral imperatives against hurting others. With the subject's own ears hearing the victim's cries, many subjects turned to the experimenter and asked who was responsible. When told that the experimenter assumed full responsibility, they continued. That is the crucial detail. The experimenter said he would take full responsibility, and that was enough. The moment someone else accepts the blame, the conscience goes quiet. The hand keeps moving. The switch keeps pressing. There were participants who refused. 35% of them walked away. They looked at the experimenter, looked at the machine, looked at the wall where the learner pounded in agony and said, "No, they are important. They will return later. But for now, sit with the 65%. Sit with the 2 out of 3. Sit with the fact that in the privacy of your own mind, you cannot be certain which group you would belong to. You would like to believe you would resist. You would like to believe you would walk away. You would like to believe that the line between you and Eichmann is thick and permanent and uncrossable. But the data says otherwise, and the data does not care about your beliefs." The fall from paradise. In the beginning, there was no shame, no guilt, no knowledge of good or evil. There was only the garden, and the man and the woman, and the voice of God walking among the trees in the cool of the day. It was paradise. It was wholeness. It was a state of being so complete that the very idea of choice, of disobedience, of falling, had not yet been born. And then came the serpent. The serpent is the voice of temptation. But more than that, the serpent is the voice of a question. The first question. The question that shattered eternity and gave birth to time. The question that cracked open the human soul and let in both light and darkness at once. The question was this: did God really say? Not a command, not a threat, just a question. And in that question, the possibility of doubt, the possibility of choice, the possibility of disobeying. The serpent promised Eve that if she ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, her eyes would be opened. She would become like God, knowing good and evil. The serpent told the truth about half of this promise. Her eyes would indeed be opened. She would indeed know. But the serpent did not tell her what knowing would cost. She ate. She gave to Adam, and their eyes were opened. And for the first time, they saw that they were naked, and they were ashamed. And they hid from the presence of God among the trees. This is the story that has shaped Western civilization for 2,000 years. It is usually called the fall. Adam and Eve disobeyed God, and because of their disobedience, all of humanity was cast out of paradise, condemned to labor, to suffering, to death, original sin, the stain that every human being inherits at birth. But there is another way to read this story, a deeper way, a psychological way. The German poet Rainer Maria Rilke once said that the serpent was not the enemy. The serpent was the midwife of consciousness. Before the fruit, Adam and Eve were like children. They had no awareness of themselves as separate beings. They had no awareness of their own mortality. They had no awareness of choice, because everything was simply given. They lived in a state of original wholeness, what the Greeks called paradise. But they did not know they were whole. They simply were. To become self-aware, to develop an ego, to acquire the ability to choose between good and evil, requires a separation, a wound, a fall from that original state of unconscious unity. Every child goes through this. Every human being goes through this. We are born integrated, in a state of original wholeness, and as we grow up, we become self-aware. We acquire an ego, and with that ego comes the painful awareness of our own separateness, our own vulnerability, our own capacity for wrongdoing. This is the fall from paradise. And it happens not once in mythological time, but every single day in the life of every human being. Here is the twist that most people miss. The Latin tradition calls this event felix culpa, the happy fault, the fortunate fall. Without the fall, there is no redemption. Without the fall, there is no growth. Without the fall, there is no self-realization, no individuation, no journey toward wholeness. The fall is not just a disaster. It is a necessary condition for everything that matters. Courage requires danger. Love requires the risk of loss. Goodness requires the real possibility of evil. A creature that cannot sin cannot choose virtue. A creature that cannot fall cannot rise. The Garden of Eden was perfect, but perfection is not the same as fulfillment. A seed is perfect in its way, but it is not yet a tree. A child is perfect in its way, but it is not yet an adult. Paradise was the seed. The fall was the cracking open of the seed so that something greater could grow. This does not mean we should seek out evil. It does not mean sin is good. It means that the capacity for evil is the price of the capacity for good. The knowledge of darkness is the price of the knowledge of light. The possibility of falling is the price of the possibility of rising. Wholeness only has meaning when we reunite our fragmented self. You cannot come home if you have never left. You cannot be saved if you have never been lost. The fall from paradise is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. The daemon, good spirit, evil spirit. Before the devil had horns and a tail, before he became the prince of darkness, before he was cast out of heaven and chained in a lake of fire, there was something older, something more ambiguous, something that the ancient Greeks called the daimon. The word itself is neutral. It does not mean demon in the modern sense. In Homer, the daimon is any divine power that intervenes in human life, sometimes for good, sometimes for ill. It is not a creature of pure evil. It is not a fallen angel. It is simply a spirit, an unseen force that lives between the gods and mortals, guiding, tempting, warning, testing. The Greeks divided the daemon into two categories: the agathodaimon, the good spirit, and the kakodaimon, the evil spirit. The agathodaimon was like a guardian angel, a tutelary figure that watched over a person or a household, mediating between men and the gods, bringing blessings and protection. The kakodaimon was the opposite. It brought trouble, it distracted, it led people away from their path toward wholeness. But here is the crucial insight that modern thinking has lost. The daemon was not external. It was not a creature that invaded the human soul from the outside. The daemon was understood as something that arises from within, a higher spirit constantly aware of its intimate connection with other human beings, with nature, and with the entire cosmos. The philosopher Socrates spoke constantly of his daimon, not as a voice that told him what to do, but as a voice that told him what not to do, a warning signal, a divine sign that prevented him from making certain choices. He never called it his conscience. He called it his daimon, and he trusted it absolutely. When our inner daimon is in a state of good order, the Greeks called this eudaimonia. The word is often translated as happiness, but that is too weak. Eudaimonia means good-spiritedness. It means being in right relationship with your own inner daimon. It means a state of fulfillment, of flourishing, of living as you were meant to live. The philosopher Aristotle wrote that eudaimonia is the highest good, the goal of all human striving, and it comes not from pleasure or wealth or fame, but from living virtuously in accordance with your true nature. But when the kakodaimon takes hold, everything falls apart. It brings confusion. It brings restlessness. It brings the sense that you are constantly being pulled off course, distracted from what matters, tempted by things that promise satisfaction but deliver only emptiness. The kakodaimon does not need to possess you. It only needs to distract you. This is where the modern understanding of demons begins. The early Christians took the Greek daimon and turned it into the demon, a malevolent supernatural entity that seeks to destroy human souls. But something was lost in translation. The Greek daimon was not a creature of pure evil. It was a force that could go either way, depending on the character of the person who housed it. Carl Jung recovered this ancient understanding. He wrote that the daimon is an autonomous complex within the psyche, a semi-independent part of the personality that can act against the conscious will of the ego. When we are in harmony with our daimon, we experience eudaimonia, a sense of meaning and purpose that no external success can provide. But when we ignore it, suppress it, or project it onto others, it becomes the kakodaimon. It becomes the devil at our heels. Here is the practical truth that emerges from this ancient wisdom. You cannot kill your daimon. You cannot exorcise it. You cannot pray it away. It is part of you. The question is never whether you have a daimon. The question is whether you are in good relationship with it or bad relationship with it. The agathodaimon whispers. The kakodaimon shouts. The good spirit guides gently. The evil spirit tempts aggressively. But they are not two separate creatures. They are the same energy, the same force, the same inner presence, experienced differently depending on whether you are aligned with your true nature or fighting against it. The kakodaimon is not your enemy, it is your symptom. It appears when you have strayed too far from your path. It distracts when you have refused to listen to the quieter voice. It torments when you have rejected your own wholeness. The only way to turn the evil spirit back into the good spirit is not to fight it, but to listen to what it is trying to tell you. What are you avoiding? What are you distracting yourself from? What is the kakodaimon trying to make you see that you would rather not see? These are old questions. They come from a time before good and evil were separated into neat categories. They come from the Greeks, who understood that the same daimon that guided Socrates could drive another man mad. The difference was not in the daimon, the difference was in the man. The Stanford prison experiment. 24 good men, 6 days, 1 nightmare. In the summer of 1971, a psychology professor named Philip Zimbardo constructed a prison in the basement of Stanford University. It was not a real prison, of course. There were no bars on the windows, no armed guards, no actual criminals. But he built it to look like a prison, small cells, a dark corridor, a closet that would serve as solitary confinement. He wanted to study what happens when ordinary people are placed in an environment of power and powerlessness. He placed an advertisement in a local newspaper. He was looking for male college students to participate in a 2-week study of prison life. The pay was $15 a day. The applicants were screened for psychological stability, criminal history, and drug use. 24 young men were selected. They were all healthy. They were all intelligent. They were all, by every measure, perfectly normal. Zimbardo flipped a coin. Half of them would be guards. Half of them would be prisoners. The coin was the only difference between them. The experiment was scheduled to last 14 days. It lasted 6. Here is what happened. The prisoners were picked up from their homes by the local police, who had agreed to cooperate with the study. They were charged with armed robbery and burglary. They were fingerprinted. They were blindfolded. They were driven to the Stanford basement, stripped naked, and sprayed with a decontamination solution. They were given smocks and nylon caps. They were assigned numbers instead of names. Prisoner 5486, Prisoner 7258, Prisoner 8612. The guards were given uniforms, khaki shirts and pants, reflective sunglasses that hid their eyes, wooden batons. They were told that they could do anything necessary to maintain order in the prison, except physically harm the prisoners. That was the only rule. Zimbardo himself took the role of superintendent. He stood above the experiment, watching it unfold, believing he was in control. By the second day, the prisoners staged a rebellion. They ripped off their caps. They shouted insults at the guards. They barricaded themselves in their cells. The guards responded with fire extinguishers, stripping the prisoners naked and forcing them to do push-ups. The ringleaders were thrown into solitary confinement, the dark closet that had once been a storage room. The guards began to invent new punishments. They forced prisoners to clean toilet bowls with their bare hands. They made them simulate sexual acts on one another. They withheld food and bathroom privileges. They woke prisoners in the middle of the night for pointless head counts. They called them by their numbers instead of their names. And they did all of this while wearing those reflective sunglasses so that no prisoner could see their eyes, could see their humanity, could see anything but the uniform and the badge and the baton. These were not sadists. These were not criminals. These were college students who had been randomly assigned to wear a uniform and given permission to exercise power. And within 48 hours, they had become something else entirely. One guard later described his transformation. He said, "I was surprised at myself. I made the prisoners call each other names and clean the latrines with their bare hands. I considered the prisoners animals. I thought, I have to show them who is boss." Another guard, who became known as John Wayne because of his particularly brutal behavior, said, "I was tired of hearing them complain. I thought, what if I just really get on them? It worked. After that, they never complained again." John Wayne was a 20-year-old college student. He had never been in trouble. He was studying to become a priest. On the night of the second day, the prisoners held a secret meeting. They discussed escaping. They discussed fighting back. But they did nothing. They had already begun to internalize their roles. They were prisoners now. Prisoners do not escape. Prisoners obey. By the fourth day, 3 prisoners had been released because of severe emotional disturbances. One had developed a psychosomatic rash all over his body. Another was screaming uncontrollably. Another had fallen into a depression so deep that he sat motionless for hours, staring at the wall. The remaining prisoners became passive. They stopped resisting. They followed orders without question. They even began to inform on one another, telling the guards which prisoners were planning to disobey. The guards had not asked for this. The prisoners offered it freely because that is what prisoners do. They collaborate with their captors. It is a survival mechanism, and it works. On the 5th day, Zimbardo invited a priest to evaluate the conditions of the prison. The priest spoke with each prisoner privately. Almost every prisoner asked the priest to get them out, but when the priest asked why they had not simply left on their own, they looked confused. The door was not locked. The basement was not sealed. They could have walked up the stairs and out of the building at any moment, but they had forgotten. They were prisoners. Prisoners do not leave. Prisoners are trapped. This is the most terrifying finding of the Stanford prison experiment. External authority is not the only force that controls human behavior. We internalize our roles. We become them. A uniform, a title, a number, a set of expectations, and within days, the person who wore civilian clothes and answered to a name has disappeared. In his place stands a guard who believes in his right to dominate, or a prisoner who believes in his own powerlessness. Zimbardo called off the experiment on the 6th day. He had planned for 14. He ended it early because a graduate student, his future wife, visited the basement and saw what was happening. She was horrified. She told him that he had become part of the experiment himself, that he was no longer observing the prison, but running it. And she was right. Zimbardo had stopped seeing the prisoners as research subjects. He saw them as prisoners. He had internalized his role too. After the experiment ended, Zimbardo debriefed the participants. He asked the guards if they had enjoyed their roles. Many of them said yes. Some expressed shame. Some expressed surprise at what they had done. But none of them believed in the moment that they were doing anything wrong. They were just doing their jobs. One guard later wrote these words: "When I put on that uniform, I became someone else. I knew who I was. I knew my name. But I didn't feel like me anymore. I felt like a guard. And guards are tough. Guards are in charge. Guards do not show weakness." 24 good men, 6 days, 1 basement, and a truth that should never be forgotten. You do not know what you are capable of until you are placed in a situation that calls it out of you. And by then, it may be too late. Pan and Pandemonium, the god of panic. There is a god forgotten by most, remembered only in the words we use when we lose control. His name is Pan. Pan is not the devil. He is older than the devil. He belongs to the world before good and evil were separated, before heaven and hell were set against each other, before the divine was split into light and darkness. Pan is a god of the wild places, of mountains and caves, of goats and shepherds, of fertility, music, and the untamed instincts that civilization tries to suppress. He has the legs of a goat, the horns of a ram, the face of a man, and he lives in the spaces between, the lonely places where the human voice sounds strange and the shadows move without explanation. The ancient Greeks knew that certain sounds could cause a peculiar kind of fear. Not the fear of a known threat, not the fear of a predator you can see and fight, but a different fear. A fear without an object. A fear that rises from the chest like a sickness, spreading through the body, making the mind go blank and the limbs refuse to move. They called this panic, from the name of the god who caused it. Pan was said to roam the mountains at noon, the hour when the sun is highest and the shadows are shortest, the hour when the boundaries between worlds grow thin. A traveler crossing a remote pass might hear a sudden noise, a rustle in the bushes, a cry that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, and then the panic would take him. His heart would race, his breath would stop, his eyes would see nothing, but his mind would fill with every possible horror. He would run without knowing where, or freeze without knowing why. This was the touch of Pan. Here is the distinction that matters. Fear has an object. You are afraid of the bear, of the fall, of the enemy you can see. Fear sharpens the senses. Fear prepares the body for action. Fear is useful. But anxiety, the word the Greeks would have associated with panic, has no object. You do not know what threatens you. You do not know what steps to take to meet the danger. And instead of becoming sharper, your perceptions become blurred. You lose the ability to think clearly. You spiral. You drown in the vague, nameless terror that something is wrong. Everything is wrong, and you cannot fix it because you cannot name it. Pan is the god of that terror, not the devil, not the tempter, not the accuser, just the wild, chaotic, irrational fear that lives in the oldest part of the brain, the part that evolved long before language, long before morality, long before the ego learned to pretend it was in control. The English poet John Milton, writing his epic Paradise Lost, needed a name for the capital city of hell. He wanted a word that captured the chaos, the uproar, the demonic confusion of Satan's kingdom. He combined the Greek Pan, meaning all, with daimon, meaning spirit or demon. Pandemonium, the place of all demons, the city where every dark spirit gathers. The word has survived. We use it today to describe any scene of wild disorder, of shouting and confusion, of systems breaking down and people losing their minds. But Milton intended something deeper. Pandemonium is not just a riot. It is the architectural expression of the diabolic. It is order pretending to be order, but actually being the absence of order. It is the capital of hell, built by fallen angels, a city that looks like a city, but functions like a wound. Pan and Pandemonium, the god of panic and the city of demons. Two words that have remained in our language because they name something real. Something that lives not in the distant past, but in the present moment. In the quiet room where you sit, listening to these words. In the hidden corners of your own mind. The devil is the tempter. The adversary is the accuser. But Pan is something else. Pan is the one who reminds you that the wilderness is still inside you, that the civilized self you present to the world is a thin veneer, that beneath the manners and the morals and the careful control, there is a creature that can still be startled into madness by a sound it cannot name. When you feel panic rising, when your chest tightens and your thoughts scatter, that is not a failure of your character. That is the oldest God you carry, reminding you that you are not as safe as you pretend to be. And that reminder, uncomfortable as it is, may be the only thing that keeps you humble enough to avoid the fall. Dehumanization, the gateway drug to evil. There is a question that has haunted psychologists for decades. How do you get an ordinary person to commit an atrocity against another ordinary person? How do you convince a human being to treat another human being as though they were not human at all? The answer, discovered through decades of research, is both simple and terrifying. You do not need to change the person. You only need to change the language. The psychologist Albert Bandura conducted a series of studies at Stanford University in the 1970s that revealed something profound about the nature of cruelty. He brought students into a laboratory and asked them to supervise a group of other students who were supposedly being evaluated on a learning task. The supervisors were told to administer punishments in the form of electric shocks when the learners made mistakes. Standard procedure, similar to Milgram, but with a twist. Before the experiment began, Bandura had the supervisors overhear a conversation about the learners. In one condition, the learners were described in ordinary terms. They were students, like the supervisors themselves, working hard to complete the task. In the other condition, the learners were described in dehumanizing language. They were called animals. They were called savages. They were referred to as a lower order of human being. The supervisors who heard the dehumanizing language administered shocks that were twice as intense as those given by the supervisors who heard the neutral description. They did not believe they were being cruel. They believed they were dealing with something less than human. And once that belief took hold, the conscience stopped protesting. This is the gateway drug to evil. Dehumanization. Every genocide in human history has been preceded by a campaign of dehumanizing language. The Jews were called vermin, rats, a plague that needed to be exterminated. The Tutsis in Rwanda were called cockroaches. The Armenians in the Ottoman Empire were called a cancer. The language always comes first. The language opens the door. The language whispers to the conscience. These are not like you. These are not persons. These are things, and things cannot be wronged. The Stanford prison experiment demonstrated the same principle with frightening clarity. The guards did not begin by hating the prisoners. They began by calling them by numbers instead of names. They began by putting bags over their heads. They began by stripping them naked and spraying them with decontamination fluid as if they were contaminated. The physical rituals of dehumanization created the psychological reality. The prisoners became less than human because they were treated as less than human. And here is the most insidious part. Dehumanization is not something that happens only in prisons and concentration camps. It happens every day, in small ways, in ordinary conversations, in the language we use without thinking. Have you ever called someone an animal, a monster, a snake, a pig? Have you ever described a group of people as vermin, as parasites, as a disease? Have you ever scrolled past a news story about strangers dying and felt nothing because they were not your kind, not your tribe, not your people? That is dehumanization. It is not loud, it is not dramatic. It is a quiet erosion of empathy, a gradual numbing of the moral imagination, a slow forgetting that the person on the other side of the screen, the other side of the border, the other side of the political divide, has a name, has a family, has a heart that beats and a mind that dreams and a fear of death just like yours. The victims of dehumanization do not need to be hated. They only need to be invisible. They only need to be categorized, labeled, filed away under a word that makes it easier to ignore their suffering. And once that word is in place, once the category is sealed, the conscience goes to sleep. Albert Bandura identified 8 mechanisms of moral disengagement, and dehumanization is the most powerful among them. The others include euphemistic language, the displacement of responsibility, the diffusion of responsibility, the disregard of consequences, the attribution of blame, and the comparison to worse evils. But dehumanization is the root. Dehumanization is the key that unlocks all the others. Because if the other is not human, then nothing you do to them is wrong. This is not ancient history. This is not something that happened only in Nazi Germany or Rwanda or Yugoslavia. This is happening now, in the language of politics, in the rhetoric of social media, in the comfortable certainty that your enemies are not merely mistaken, but evil, not merely wrong, but subhuman. Dehumanization is the gateway drug to evil, and we are all addicts. The question is not whether you will be tempted to dehumanize. The question is whether you will recognize the temptation when it comes, dressed in the language of your own righteousness, and choose to see a human face instead. Scapegoating and shadow projection. The ancient ritual is described in the 16th chapter of Leviticus. Once a year, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest would take 2 goats. One goat would be sacrificed to the Lord, its blood sprinkled on the mercy seat to cleanse the tabernacle from the sins of Israel. But the second goat, the live goat, was different. The high priest would place both hands on the head of the second goat and confess over it all the iniquities of the people, all their transgressions, all their sins. He would speak them aloud, naming the darkness of the nation, and as he spoke, he would transfer that darkness onto the goat. The goat would then be led into the wilderness, far from the camp, far from the community, and released. It would carry the sins of the people away into a land cut off from human habitation, never to return. This is the origin of the word scapegoat. The term was coined by the English translator William Tyndale, who needed a word for the goat that escaped, the goat that was sent away. Scapegoat, the escape goat, the one who bears the blame and is banished so that the rest may go free. Carl Jung saw in this ancient ritual a profound psychological truth. Every human being carries a shadow. The shadow is the part of ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge, the traits we find shameful, the impulses we cannot accept, the darkness that lives in the same heart that loves its children and helps its neighbors. We do not want to believe that we are capable of envy, of greed, of cruelty, of lust, of cowardice. So we push these traits down into the unconscious. We pretend they are not there. We construct a self-image that is good, decent, and entirely false. But the shadow does not disappear. It cannot be banished by denial. It only grows stronger in the dark, feeding on the energy we use to suppress it. And eventually, it demands expression. The most common expression of the shadow is projection. We take the traits we cannot accept in ourselves and see them in others. The man who cannot admit his own greed becomes obsessed with the greed of immigrants. The woman who cannot face her own anger becomes convinced that her neighbor is full of rage. The nation that cannot confront its own violence projects that violence onto an enemy, any enemy, as long as it is far enough away to be blamed for everything that is wrong at home. Jung wrote these words: This is the deeper meaning of the fact that Christ as the Redeemer was crucified between two thieves. These thieves in their way were also redeemers of mankind. They were the scapegoats. Think about that. The two thieves crucified alongside Jesus were not random criminals. They were symbols. They represented the two poles of projection that operate in every human society. One thief, traditionally called the impenitent thief, represents the projection of hatred. He is the scapegoat we hate. The other thief, the penitent thief, represents the projection of salvation. He is the scapegoat we adore. Both are projections. Both are distortions. Both allow us to avoid the difficult work of owning our own shadow. In shadow projection, one is tied to others in hatred. The lower classes become the target of repressed envy. Racial and national minorities become the carriers of our own violence. People of other faiths become the vessels for our own doubt. We see in them what we cannot see in ourselves, and we hate them for it. Not because they have done anything wrong, because they have become the mirror we refuse to look into. But there is another form of projection, equally dangerous, though it wears a kinder face. In savior projection, one is tied to another person not in hatred, but in blind and uncritical adoration. A leader emerges who promises to save the nation from poverty, from famine, from misery. He becomes a godlike figure. He becomes the symbolic carrier of the unconscious of millions of people. Whatever darkness they cannot face in themselves, they project onto him as light. He cannot fail. He cannot be wrong. He is the answer to every question. This is the God complex, and it is the twin of the scapegoat. Where the scapegoat receives all the blame, the savior receives all the praise. Both are inhuman. Both are projections. Both lead to destruction. Jung understood that the only way out of this trap is to withdraw the projection, to look into the mirror and see what belongs to you, to say, I am capable of that. I am not pure. I am not above the sins I condemn in others. The shadow is not something to be cast out like the scapegoat into the wilderness. The shadow is something to be integrated, to be known, to be accepted as part of the whole. None of us stand outside humanity's black collective shadow. We are all capable of the same atrocities. We are all capable of the same blindness. The question is not whether you have a shadow. The question is whether you will have the courage to meet it. When you point one finger at someone, 3 fingers point back at you. That is not a platitude. That is a psychological law. The thing you most hate in others is almost certainly the thing you most fear in yourself. And until you can face that, you will keep sending goats into the wilderness, and the wilderness will keep sending them back. The devil, the one who divides. The word itself contains the secret, devil. It comes from the Greek verb diabalein, which means to tear apart, to separate, to throw across. The devil is the one who divides, the accuser, the slanderer, the one who takes what is whole and fractures it into pieces. There is an opposite word in Greek, symbalein, to put together, to unite, to bring into harmony. From this word we get symbol, something that draws together, that connects the individual to himself and to his group, that creates meaning by joining what was separate. The symbolic and the diabolic. One unites, one tears apart, and the devil, by his very name, is the master of division. The psychologist Rollo May understood this distinction with profound clarity. He wrote that the symbolic is that which draws together, ties, integrates the individual in himself and with his group. The diabolic, in contrast, is that which disintegrates and tears apart. The devil does not create anything new. He only destroys what already exists. He takes a community and turns it against itself. He takes a family and sets member against member. He takes a single soul and splits it into warring fragments, the left hand fighting the right, the heart at war with the mind, the conscience screaming at the desire. Divide and conquer, the oldest strategy of power. The devil does not need to defeat you. He only needs to divide you, from yourself, from your neighbors, from your own deepest truth. Look at the divisions that surround us. Race against race, sex against sex, religion against religion, politics against politics. Every day, new lines are drawn, new enemies named, new tribes formed for the purpose of hating the other tribe. This is the work of the diabolic, not because any particular political position is evil, but because the act of division itself, the reduction of another human being to a label, a category, an enemy, is the very essence of what the devil does. The devil loves to scatter. The devil loves confusion. The devil loves the moment when a person stops seeing a face and starts seeing a threat. Because in that moment, the person has become diabolic himself. He has become a carrier of the division. He has become a tiny reflection of the great accuser. There is a reason that the ancient rituals of exorcism always began by asking the demon its name. Name it, and you have power over it. The devil's name is Legion, for we are many. Not one demon, but thousands. Not one division, but infinite. The devil is not a single enemy you can fight and defeat. The devil is a pattern, a process, a way of being in the world that turns everything it touches into fragments. When a community forms, it can be a source of brotherly love, to love thy neighbor as thyself, to see in the other a reflection of the divine. This is the symbolic. This is the power that draws together. But the moment that community defines itself by who it excludes, the moment it draws a line and says, we are good and they are evil, the devil enters. Not as a figure of horns and hooves, but as a whisper. The whisper that says, they are not like us. The whisper that says, they do not deserve what we deserve. The whisper that says, it is not wrong to hate them because they are hateful. This whisper is the diabolic, and it speaks in every human heart. The division does not only happen between people, it happens within people. The Gerasene demoniac in the Gospel of Mark is described as a man possessed by a legion of demons. He lived among the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. No one could bind him. No one could control him. When Jesus asked his name, he said, Legion, for we are many. A legion was 3,000 to 6,000 soldiers. The man was not possessed by one demon, but by an army. His personality had shattered into fragments. He no longer had an ego that functioned as an anchor to reality. He was divided against himself, and his division had made him a stranger to his own humanity. This is what the diabolic does. It scatters, it fragments, it takes a unified self and turns it into a battlefield. You want to be good, but you do evil. You want to love, but you hate. You want peace, but you cannot stop fighting. The division is not between you and the devil. The division is within you, and the devil is the name for the force that keeps you broken. The opposite of the diabolic is not the angelic. The opposite of the diabolic is the symbolic, the power that draws together, the power that heals, the power that takes the fragments and reassembles them into a whole. This is not easy work. It is much easier to divide than to unite, much easier to hate than to understand, much easier to point a finger than to extend a hand. But the symbolic is possible. Wholeness is possible. Integration is possible, not by fighting the devil, but by refusing to become him. The slippery slope. How small transgressions grow. At Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, the photographs shocked the world. Hooded prisoners stacked in pyramids, a man on a leash, smiling American soldiers giving thumbs up beside naked bodies. The faces of the guards were not the faces of monsters. They were young. They were ordinary. They had mothers and fathers and high school yearbooks. And yet they had done something that most people believe only monsters can do. The story of Ivan Frederick, one of the guards convicted for his role at Abu Ghraib, reveals the mechanism. Frederick was a military police officer, a religious man who sang in his church choir. Before his deployment, he had no criminal record, no history of violence, no indication that he was capable of what he would later do. By his own account, He was an ordinary soldier doing an ordinary job. But something changed. Not overnight. Not in a single moment of decision. Slowly. Incrementally. One small step at a time. The first transgression was minor. A prisoner talked back. A guard yelled. Then a shove. Then a punch. Then the command to strip. Then the dog leash. Then the pyramid of naked bodies. Each step was only slightly worse than the step before. The slope was so gradual that Frederick never felt himself descending. He was just doing his job, just following orders, just maintaining order in a chaotic environment. This is the slippery slope, and it is the most dangerous mechanism in the psychology of evil. The foot in the door phenomenon is well documented in social psychology. If you ask someone to do a small favor, they are likely to agree. And once they have agreed to the small favor, they are significantly more likely to agree to a larger favor. The commitment has been made. The identity has shifted. I am the kind of person who helps. I am the kind of person who follows orders. I am the kind of person who does what needs to be done. The same mechanism operates in reverse. A small cruelty leads to a larger cruelty, leads to an atrocity. Not because the person has become a different person, because the person has redefined what is acceptable. The first shock in Milgram's experiment was only 15 volts. That is nothing, a tingle, a joke. But once you have pressed the 15-volt switch, the 30-volt switch is easier. And once you have pressed 30, 45 is almost automatic. By the time you reach 300 volts, the learner is screaming, but you have already pressed 20 switches. You have already committed. You are already the kind of person who does this. The slippery slope is not a failure of character. It is a feature of how the human mind works. We adapt to our own behavior. We normalize what we once found shocking. We tell ourselves stories that make our actions seem reasonable, necessary, even good. The guard who strips a prisoner does not believe he is torturing a human being. He believes he is maintaining discipline. He believes he is protecting his fellow soldiers. He believes he is doing what anyone would do in his situation. And he is right. That is the terror. Anyone would. Given the right circumstances, the right pressure, the right sequence of small steps, almost anyone would. The ancient philosophers understood this long before the psychologists confirmed it. Aristotle wrote that we become what we repeatedly do. Character is not a fixed thing. It is not a diamond carved once and forever. Character is a muscle. It is strengthened by good choices and weakened by bad ones. Every time you choose the small kindness, you become slightly more kind. Every time you choose the small cruelty, you become slightly more cruel. The slope goes both ways, but the descent is easier than the ascent. Gravity is on the side of the fall. The slope is always tilted toward darkness, because darkness requires less effort. It is easier to yell than to listen, easier to hate than to understand, easier to follow orders than to think for yourself, easier to press the switch than to walk away. The question is not whether you will face the slippery slope. You will. Everyone does. The question is whether you will recognize it when you are on it, whether you will feel the ground shifting beneath your feet and have the courage to stop, to step back, to refuse the next small transgression that will make the next one easier and the next one inevitable. Because the devil does not ask you to become a monster in a single choice. He asks you to take one small step, just one, and then another, and then another. And by the time you look back, the shore is gone, and you have forgotten that you ever knew how to swim. Deals with the devil, Faust, Tartini, and the Crossroads. There is a story told in every culture, in every age. A man stands at a crossroads. He wants something he cannot have. Youth, love, knowledge, wealth, power, fame. And a figure appears, sometimes old, sometimes beautiful, always dangerous. The figure offers to give the man what he desires. The price is the man's soul. This is the deal with the devil. And it is not just a fairy tale. The most famous version of the story comes from Germany. A scholar named Faust. Dr. Johann Georg Faust was a real person, an alchemist, an astrologer, a magician who lived in the 16th century. He was known for making grand claims and dying under mysterious circumstances. After his death, legends grew around him. He had sold his soul to the devil. He had flown through the air. He had conjured the spirits of the dead. Within a generation, Faust had become the symbol of forbidden knowledge, the man who traded eternity for a taste of worldly power. The legend was turned into a play by Christopher Marlowe, and later into an epic poem by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Goethe's Faust is the version that endures. In Goethe's telling, Faust is not a villain. He is a scholar, a man of learning who has mastered every field of human knowledge and found them all empty. He knows philosophy, law, medicine, theology. He knows everything that can be known from books, and he is miserable. Knowledge has not given him meaning. It has only shown him how much he does not know. In his despair, Faust turns to magic. He summons the devil, or rather, the devil comes to him. First as a dog, then as a wandering scholar, then as Mephistopheles, the spirit of negation, the one who denies. Mephistopheles offers Faust a bargain. He will serve Faust on earth, giving him pleasure, power, and knowledge beyond what any human has ever possessed. In return, Faust must serve Mephistopheles in hell. But there is a twist. If Faust ever experiences a moment so perfect that he begs for it to last forever, that moment will be his last. The deal will be sealed. His soul will be lost. Faust accepts, not because he is greedy, but because he believes he can never be satisfied. He is too restless, too hungry, too driven to ever stop wanting more. The moment of perfect bliss will never come. He is safe. But the moment does come, not in pleasure, not in power, not in the arms of a lover. It comes when Faust envisions a great work of public service, a land reclaimed from the sea, a community of free people living in prosperity. He imagines a future he will never see, and in that moment, he says to the passing instant, "Stay, you are so beautiful." He dies. Mephistopheles reaches for his soul, but Faust is saved, not because he was sinless, because he never stopped striving. He never gave in to idleness or despair. He kept reaching, kept working, kept trying to become better than he was. And this constant striving, this refusal to settle, this commitment to growth, redeems him. The Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke understood this better than almost anyone. After withdrawing from psychotherapy, he wrote these words, "If my devils are to leave me, I am afraid my angels will take flight as well." The devils and the angels are not separate. They are two sides of the same striving, the same passion, the same fire. The devil tempts, the angel guides. But without the temptation, there is no need for guidance. Without the possibility of falling, there is no virtue in standing. There is a musical version of the Faust story. The Italian violinist Giuseppe Tartini had a dream in the 18th century. He dreamed that the devil appeared to him and offered to be his servant and teacher. Tartini handed the devil his violin. What happened next changed him forever. The devil played. The music was so beautiful, so sublime, so far beyond anything Tartini had ever imagined, that he felt his breath fail and his heart stop. He woke up gasping. He grabbed his violin and tried to recreate what he had heard. The result was the Devil's Trill Sonata, Tartini's most famous composition. He said it was the best thing he ever wrote. And then he said it was so inferior to what he had heard in the dream that he would have smashed his violin and abandoned music forever if he could have afforded to live another way. Tartini never forgot that dream. The devil had given him a gift and a wound. The gift was the music. The wound was the knowledge that human art can never match the beauty of the impossible. He had made a deal, not for his soul, but for his inspiration. And he paid the price every time he picked up his violin. These stories are not literal, they are psychological. The deal with the devil is not made at a crossroads with a horned figure. It is made in the quiet moments when you trade integrity for advancement, when you trade honesty for approval, when you trade your deepest values for something you want right now. The crossroads is not a place, it is a choice. Faust was saved because he kept striving. Tartini was haunted because he could not forget. The difference between them is not that one sinned and the other did not. The difference is that one used his deal to grow and the other used his deal to compare. The devil always keeps his end of the bargain. The question is whether you will keep yours, and whether, when the moment comes, you will have the strength to say, "Stay, you are beautiful," and then keep walking. Lucifer and Satan, the morning star and the adversary. The devil has many names. Some are spoken in fear, some are whispered in hatred, some are invoked in rituals that dare not speak them aloud, but two names stand above the rest, and they are not the same. Lucifer, Satan, the lightbringer and the accuser, the fallen angel and the prosecutor. Understanding the difference between them is essential to understanding the psychology of evil. Lucifer is a Latin word. It means lightbringer or morning star. In Roman astronomy, Lucifer was the name given to the planet Venus when it appeared in the eastern sky before sunrise. The brightest object in the heavens, second only to the sun and the moon, rising in the darkness as a herald of the coming dawn. In Roman folklore, the morning star was personified as a male figure bearing a torch, lighting the way for the sun. The morning star was also a symbol of pride. It is one of the brightest objects in the sky. It appears to triumph over the darkness, but its victory is brief. When the sun rises, the morning star is humbled. It vanishes from sight, swallowed by the greater light. The morning star reaches for the highest seat in heaven, only to be cast down to the underworld when the true king appears. The book of Isaiah contains a passage that has been interpreted as the story of Lucifer's fall. The text addresses the king of Babylon, a tyrant who exalted himself above the gods. It says, "How have you fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn? You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. But you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit." This passage was about a human king, but early Christian interpreters saw something deeper. They saw the story of an angel who rebelled against God, who was cast out of heaven because of pride. The morning star became Lucifer, the first fallen angel, the one who said non serviam, I will not serve. And Lucifer became synonymous with the devil. Pride is the original sin. Not lust, not greed, not anger. Pride. The belief that you are above the rules that apply to everyone else. The belief that your vision, your will, your desires should be the center of the universe. Lucifer did not fall because he was weak. He fell because he was beautiful. He was the brightest angel. He was the closest to God. And he could not bear to be anything less than the highest. The book of Revelation describes a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. The dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. And it is written that a third of the angels followed Lucifer in his rebellion. A third, not a handful, not a fringe. A significant portion of heaven chose pride over obedience, chose self over God, chose to fall rather than to serve. If Lucifer is the light bringer, the fallen angel of pride, Satan is something else. Satan comes from the Hebrew word, hey Satan, meaning the adversary or the accuser. In the Hebrew Bible, Satan is not a rebel against God. He is a member of God's divine council. His job is to test human beings, to challenge their faith, to accuse them of their sins. He is like a prosecutor in the courtroom of heaven. He is not evil, he is necessary. This changes everything. In the book of Job, Satan appears before God with the other divine beings. God points to Job, his faithful servant, a man who is blameless and upright. Satan says, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has? You have blessed the work of his hands. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." Satan is not tempting Job to sin. He is questioning whether Job's piety is genuine. Is Job good because he loves goodness, or because God has paid him to be good? This is a legitimate question, and God allows Satan to test it. Satan acts with God's permission. He is not working behind God's back. He is not trying to overthrow the divine order. He is doing his job. He is the adversary. He is the one who questions, who doubts, who pushes human beings to prove that their faith is real. Without Satan, there would be no testing. Without testing, there would be no growth. Without growth, there would be no genuine virtue. Confusion arises when Lucifer and Satan are merged into a single figure. The proud rebel who refused to serve becomes the same as the divine prosecutor who tests the faithful. But they are not the same. One is pride, the other is doubt. One leads to rebellion, the other leads to refinement. Jesus is also called the morning star in the book of Revelation. He is described as the bright morning star. The difference between Lucifer and Christ is the difference between stolen light and genuine light. Lucifer's light is a poor imitation, a reflection that disappears when the sun rises. Christ's light is the sun itself. One illuminates by its own power. The other borrows brightness it cannot sustain. Lucifer disguises himself as an angel of light. He always has. The most dangerous lies are the ones that look like truth. The most dangerous temptations are the ones that promise enlightenment. The morning star is beautiful. It is bright. It rises before the dawn. But it is not the sun. And those who mistake it for the sun will find themselves wandering in darkness when the true light appears. Satan, the adversary, is different. He does not pretend to be light. He is honest about his role. He tests. He accuses. He challenges. And in doing so, he serves a purpose that even God acknowledges as necessary. Without the adversary, there is no victory. Without the accusation, there is no innocence. Without the test, there is no proof. Lucifer fell because he wanted to be God. Satan serves because he knows he is not. One is a cautionary tale about pride. The other is a necessary function of a moral universe. The devil is not one figure. The devil is many. And understanding which devil you are facing may be the difference between falling and standing. Job's wager: when God and Satan work together. The book of Job is the strangest book in the Bible. It contains no laws, no prophecies, no promises of salvation. It is a philosophical drama, a courtroom battle, a wrestling match between a man and his God. And at the center of the story stands Satan, not as a demon, not as the enemy of God, but as a member of the divine council, the adversary, the prosecutor, the one who asks the question that God himself cannot answer. Job is a righteous man. The text says he is blameless and upright, one who fears God and turns away from evil. He has 10 children, thousands of livestock, and more wealth than anyone in the East. He is, by every measure, a good man who has been blessed for his goodness. The moral universe makes sense. Good is rewarded. Evil is punished. Then Satan appears before God. God points to Job and says, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth." Satan does not dispute Job's righteousness. Instead, he questions its motive. Does Job fear God for nothing? You have blessed him. You have protected him. You have given him everything. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. This is not an accusation. It is a hypothesis. And God accepts the wager. Satan is given permission to take everything from Job, not because God is cruel, but because God wants to know if Job's faithfulness is genuine. Is Job good because he loves goodness, or because goodness has paid him well? The only way to answer that question is to remove the payment, to strip away every blessing, to see what remains when there is nothing left to lose. The messengers come, one after another, each bringing worse news than the last. The Sabaeans have stolen the oxen and donkeys. Fire from heaven has burned the sheep. The Chaldeans have taken the camels. And finally, the worst news of all. Your sons and daughters were feasting in their brother's house when a great wind struck. The house collapsed. All of them are dead. Job tears his robe. He shaves his head. He falls to the ground. And he speaks words that have echoed through millennia. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He does not curse God. He does not blame. He accepts. And the text says that in all this, Job did not sin. But Satan is not finished. He appears before God again. He says, skin for skin. A man will give everything for his own life. Stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. Again, God permits the test. Satan strikes Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Job sits in ashes, scraping his wounds with a piece of broken pottery. His wife tells him to curse God and die. Job refuses. He says, "Shall we receive good from God and not receive evil?" 3 friends come to comfort Job. They sit with him for 7 days and 7 nights, saying nothing because his grief is too great for words. But eventually, they speak. And their speeches reveal the conventional wisdom of the ancient world. God is just. Therefore, suffering must be punishment for sin. If you are suffering, you must have done something wrong. Confess, repent, and God will restore you. Job knows his own heart. He knows he has not sinned. He demands an audience with God. He wants to present his case. He wants to know why an innocent man has been made to suffer. The friends accuse him of arrogance. They tell him to humble himself. He refuses. He says, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that he shall stand upon the earth." He says, "God has wronged me." He says, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." And then, after 37 chapters of argument, God answers out of the whirlwind. God does not explain. He does not apologize. He does not give Job the reasons he demanded. Instead, God asks questions. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Have you commanded the morning since your days began? Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Do you give the horse its might? Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom? God is not justifying himself. He is enlarging Job's perspective. You think you understand justice, God says. You think you understand good and evil, but you have seen only a fraction of what I have made. The world contains not only order but chaos, not only light but darkness, not only Behemoth, the great beast of the land, but Leviathan, the dragon of the sea. I have created both. I hold both, and I am not required to explain myself to you. Job responds with humility. He says, "I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me. I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." God restores Job's fortunes. He gives him twice as much as he had before. New children, new wealth, a long and full life. But that is not the point. The point is that Job has learned something that cannot be learned through blessing alone. He has learned that faithfulness is not a transaction. He has learned that the moral universe is more complex than the friends imagined. He has learned that God contains both light and darkness, and that to worship only the light is to worship a God of one's own making. The psychologist Carl Jung wrote a book called Answer to Job. In it, he argued that the book of Job represents a crucial moment in the self-consciousness of God. Through Job's stubborn righteousness, God is forced to confront his own shadow, to recognize that his treatment of Job was unjust. And this recognition, this self-reflection, pushes God toward incarnation. toward becoming human, toward experiencing suffering from the inside. Without Job, there would be no Christ. Without the accuser, there would be no growth. Without the wager, there would be no redemption. Satan did not act behind God's back. He acted with God's permission. He served a purpose. He was the adversary, yes, but he was also the catalyst, the one who forced the question that could not be ignored. And in forcing that question, he made possible the answer that would come centuries later, on a cross, when God himself would cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Job's wager is not about gambling with souls. It is about the necessity of testing, the necessity of doubt, the necessity of darkness. Without the adversary, there is no proof of love. Without the fall, there is no redemption. Without Satan, God remains alone in heaven, never knowing whether anyone loves him for himself or only for his blessings. And that is a question worth the suffering of every Job who has ever lived. The harrowing of hell, Christ's descent into darkness. Between the crucifixion and the resurrection, there is a gap. 3 days, the body of Jesus lies in a tomb, sealed with stone. The disciples hide in fear. The world holds its breath. And according to ancient Christian tradition, something happened during those 3 days that is not recorded in the Gospels. Christ descended into hell. The Apostles' Creed states it plainly. He descended into hell. The harrowing of hell, as this event came to be called, is the moment when Christ entered the realm of the dead, broke down its gates, and liberated the souls held captive there. Adam and Eve, Abraham and Moses, the prophets and the patriarchs, all the righteous who had died before the crucifixion, waiting in the darkness for a redemption that had not yet come. Christ did not go to hell as a prisoner. He went as a conqueror. He shattered the gates of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. He trampled down death by death. He led captivity captive. The icons of the Orthodox Church show Christ standing on the broken doors of Hades, pulling Adam and Eve up by their wrists, lifting them out of the tomb and into the light. Carl Jung saw this myth as a profound psychological truth. He wrote, "Therefore, after his death, Christ had to journey to hell, otherwise the ascent to heaven would have become impossible for him. Christ first had to become his Antichrist, his underworldly brother." This is a shocking statement. Christ had to become his opposite. The light had to enter darkness. The sinless had to descend into the realm of sin. The one who never knew death had to die and go where the dead go. Only by plumbing the depths could he rise to the heights. Only by becoming the Antichrist could he become fully Christ. The harrowing of hell is not just a theological doctrine. It is a psychological blueprint. Everyone's journey toward wholeness, toward self-knowledge, toward spiritual awakening, begins with a descent. You cannot ascend to heaven without first descending into hell, the hell of your own shadow, the hell of your own repressed desires, the hell of the wounds you have hidden and the sins you have denied. Dante understood this. His Divine Comedy begins in a dark wood, halfway through his life, and the first part of his journey is through the 9 circles of hell. He must see the worst of what human beings are capable of. He must see the punishment that awaits the unrepentant. He must descend before he can ascend to purgatory and then to paradise. The formula is universal. Descent before ascent. Darkness before light. Death before rebirth. Every hero's journey, from Odysseus to Frodo, from the Buddha to Christ, follows this pattern. You cannot reach the treasure without crossing the abyss. You cannot find the Grail without entering the wasteland. Christ's descent into hell was not a defeat. It was a victory. The devil thought he had won when Christ died on the cross. He did not foresee the resurrection. He did not foresee the harrowing. He did not foresee that the gates of hell, once breached, could never be sealed again. For you, the harrowing is the same. The darkness you fear to enter is the very place where your liberation waits. The shadow you refuse to face is the gatekeeper to your wholeness. Christ went first. He showed the way, and he left the gates open for everyone who follows. Ordinary monsters: Shipman, FRITZL, and GARAVITO. When we hear the word monster, we imagine something recognizably evil. A face twisted with malice, eyes that glow with hatred, a voice that sounds like gravel and growls like a beast. But the real monsters of human history rarely look like monsters. They look like us. They live in our neighborhoods. They work in our hospitals. They raise children, pay taxes, and smile at their neighbors. And hidden beneath the ordinary surface, they commit acts so terrible that the mind struggles to comprehend them. Consider Harold Shipman. To his patients in Hyde, England, he was a kind and caring family doctor. He made house calls. He listened to their complaints. He had a gentle manner and a reassuring smile. He was, by all accounts, a good doctor. Between 1975 and 1998, Dr. Shipman killed at least 250 of his own patients, perhaps more. He injected them with lethal doses of diamorphine, then signed their death certificates, listing natural causes. He did not hate his victims. He did not rob them, though he sometimes forged their wills. He simply killed them. And when he was finally caught, when the police searched his home, they found a typewriter and a collection of medical records. Nothing more. No shrine to death. No manifesto. No explanation. The British inquiry into Shipman's crimes concluded that he was a psychopath, but that label explains nothing. What kind of psychopath spends decades building a trusted medical practice only to use that trust as a weapon? Shipman was not a monster in the shadows. He was a monster in a white coat. He was the doctor you would have trusted with your mother's life, and your mother would have died smiling at him. Then there is Josef Fritzl. For 24 years, Fritzl kept his own daughter prisoner in a soundproofed basement beneath his family home in Amstetten, Austria. He constructed the dungeon himself, adding rooms, a kitchen, a shower, and a lock that could only be opened by an electronic code. He brought his daughter down there when she was 18. He told the police and his wife that she had run away to join a cult. He fathered 7 children with her, one of whom died shortly after birth. He burned the baby's body in a furnace. The neighbors knew Fritzl as a quiet, hard-working man. He was an engineer. He rented out rooms in his house. He seemed normal. When police finally discovered the dungeon, when they freed his daughter and the surviving children, Fritzl did not resist. He simply said, "I am a monster." But he had not been a monster until the moment he was caught. Before that, he was a father, a husband, a landlord, a citizen. The monster lived inside the ordinary man, and the ordinary man kept the monster fed for 24 years. Luis Garavito is known as the Beast of Colombia. He confessed to the murder of 140 children. Investigators believe the true number may be closer to 300. Garavito was a drifter, a street vendor, a man who looked harmless and spoke softly. He befriended young boys, offered them small gifts, and then led them to remote areas where he killed them. He kept meticulous records, dates, locations, names, methods. He was not insane. He was not delusional. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it for years without being stopped. When Garavito was finally arrested, he cooperated fully with the police. He led them to mass graves. He described his methods in clinical detail, and he expressed remorse. Whether that remorse was genuine is impossible to know. What is clear is that Garavito walked through the world for decades, killing children, and no one suspected him because he did not look like a killer. What do these 3 men have in common? They are not theatrical villains. They did not cackle or monologue. They did not dress in black or worship dark gods. They were ordinary. They were boring. They were the kind of people you would not look at twice on the street. And that is precisely why they succeeded for so long. The psychologist Philip Zimbardo, who created the Stanford prison experiment, spent years studying the psychology of evil. He concluded that evil is not a personality trait. It is a transformation, a process. Ordinary people, placed in ordinary situations, can commit extraordinary atrocities without ever feeling like they have become someone else. Shipman felt he was relieving suffering. FRITZL felt he was keeping his family together. GARAVITO felt he was satisfying a need. Each of them had a rationalization. Each of them had a story that made their actions feel justified. The lesson is not that every ordinary person is a hidden monster. The lesson is that you cannot identify a monster by looking at the face. The monster does not announce itself. The monster does not wear a sign. The monster lives in the same heart that loves, the same mind that plans for the future, the same body that eats breakfast and walks the dog and goes to sleep at night. If you want to recognize evil, you must look not at the face of the other, but at the systems, the situations, the rationalizations that allow ordinary people to do extraordinary harm. You must look at the doctor who believes he is helping, the father who believes he is protecting, the drifter who believes he is entitled. You must look at the stories people tell themselves to sleep at night, and you must ask yourself, what stories am I telling? Archetypes and ego inflation, when you think you are God. There are patterns in the human psyche that are older than any individual human being. Carl Jung called them archetypes. They are not learned, they are inherited. They are the fundamental structures of the human mind, the ancient rivers carved into the bedrock of consciousness over millions of years of evolution. The mother, the father, the hero, the shadow, the wise old man, the trickster, and the devil. Archetypes are not good or evil. They are beyond morality. They are primitive. They are powerful. And they are dangerous precisely because of their power. When an archetype takes hold of a person, it does not feel like an invasion from outside. It feels like truth. It feels like revelation. It feels like the person has finally become who they were always meant to be. This is ego inflation. The ego is the center of conscious identity. It is the I that says I am. In a healthy person, the ego is strong enough to navigate daily life, but humble enough to recognize its limits. It knows that it is not the whole of the psyche. It knows that there are forces within that are greater than itself. It listens. It learns. It grows. But when an archetype captures the ego becomes inflated. It swells beyond its natural size. It begins to believe that it is the archetype. Not a person who sometimes acts with courage, but the hero. Not a person who has occasional insights, but the wise one. Not a person who struggles with darkness, but the devil himself, or God. The Stanford guards did not become cruel because they decided to be cruel. They became cruel because the archetype of the guard, the authority figure, the enforcer, captured their egos. They were no longer 20-year-old college students. They were the law. They were the power. They were the ones who decided who ate and who starved, who slept and who stood, who lived in light and who was thrown into darkness. This is ego inflation, and it is a form of psychosis. Jung wrote, "The images of the unconscious place a great responsibility upon a man. Failure to understand them, or a shirking of ethical responsibility, deprives him of his wholeness and imposes a painful fragmentariness on his life." Identifying with an archetype is not integration, it is possession. The archetype does not become part of you. You become part of it. You lose your individual perspective, your moral compass, your ability to say, "I am not this, I am more than this." You become a vessel for forces you no longer control. The God complex is the most dangerous form of ego inflation. A leader who believes he is chosen by God, a revolutionary who believes history speaks through him, a cult leader who believes he alone sees the truth. These are not merely arrogant people. They are people who have been captured by an archetype so powerful that their own ego has dissolved into it. They no longer act. They are acted through. The only protection against ego inflation is self-knowledge, knowing your limits, knowing your shadow, knowing that no matter how inspired you feel, no matter how powerful the vision, you are still a human being. You still have blind spots. You still make mistakes. You are not the hero. You are not the devil. You are not God. You are just you, and that is enough. The psychological activities of the demonic. The devil does not always arrive in a storm of fire and fury. Most of the time, he arrives in a whisper, a suggestion, a small voice that sounds exactly like your own thoughts, telling you that one little compromise won't hurt, that everyone else is doing it, that you deserve this, that no one will ever know. This is temptation, the ordinary activity of the demonic. Temptation is not the same as sin. Temptation is the invitation. Sin is the acceptance. And the devil's greatest skill is making the invitation seem reasonable. He does not ask you to become a monster in a single choice. He asks you to take a small step, just one, and then another, and then another. By the time you realize how far you have traveled, you have forgotten the way back. The gate that leads to destruction is broad, and many enter through it. The gate that leads to peace is narrow, and none may enter except through affliction of the soul. The devil does not need to force you through the wide gate. He only needs to make it look appealing. When temptation is resisted, the devil does not give up. He changes tactics. He moves from invitation to obsession. Obsession is not possession. In obsession, the person is not controlled by an external force. They are controlled by an internal loop, a thought that repeats itself endlessly, an image that will not leave the mind, a desire that grows stronger the more it is denied. The obsessed person knows that the thought is irrational. They know that the compulsion is harmful, but knowing is not enough. The thought returns, the compulsion wins, and the person feels trapped in their own mind. The Roman philosopher Seneca wrote, "We are not given a short life, we make it short, and we are not ill-supplied but wasteful of it." Obsession is waste. It consumes time and energy that could be used for growth, for love, for creation. It turns the mind into a prison cell, and the prisoner into the jailer. When obsession is not confronted, it deepens into oppression. Oppression is a state of heaviness, a weight on the spirit, a sense that no matter what you do, you cannot escape the darkness that follows you. The oppressed person feels watched, judged, condemned. They lose hope, they lose energy, they lose the will to fight. Everything becomes grey. Food loses its taste. Laughter sounds hollow. The future, once full of possibility, becomes a flat line extending into nothing. This is the state that the ancient spiritual traditions called acedia, the noonday demon, the paralysis of the soul that makes every action feel pointless and every choice feel meaningless. The oppressed person does not need an exorcism. They need a reason to get out of bed. They need a hand to pull them from the quicksand. They need to remember that the heaviness is not the truth of who they are, but a condition that can be survived. Temptation, obsession, oppression. These are the three ordinary activities of the demonic. Not possession, not levitation, not speaking in tongues. Ordinary, everyday. The whisper that becomes a thought. The thought that becomes a loop. The loop that becomes a weight. The devil does not need to break down your door. He only needs to keep you distracted, keep you obsessed, keep you so heavy with despair that you forget you ever had the strength to stand. But here is the truth that the devil does not want you to know. He cannot read your thoughts. He is not omniscient. He is an excellent observer, a master of pattern recognition, but he does not know what you will do next. And that means you can surprise him. The fool in fairy tales often outwits the devil, not because the fool is clever, because the fool is pure. The fool does not second guess. The fool does not strategize. The fool simply refuses to play the game. And in that refusal, the devil's power dissolves. You cannot always control the temptation. You cannot always stop the obsession. You cannot always lift the oppression by sheer will. but you can refuse to believe the devil's lies. You can remember that the whisper is not your voice, the loop is not your destiny, the weight is not your permanent state, and you can reach for the hand that is always there, waiting to pull you out. The hero's choice, resisting the pull of darkness. On January 2nd, 2007, a 20-year-old construction worker named Wesley Autry was waiting for a subway train in New York City. He was standing on the platform with his 2 young daughters. It was a cold winter evening. The station was crowded. The train was approaching. Then a man on the platform suffered a seizure. He stumbled backward, fell off the edge, and landed on the tracks below. The train was coming. The lights of the headlamp were visible in the tunnel. There was no time to pull the man back onto the platform. There was only time for a choice. Wesley Autry jumped. He did not hesitate. He did not calculate the odds. He did not think about his own safety. He jumped onto the tracks, pressed the man down into the drainage trench between the rails, and lay on top of him as the train thundered overhead. The train passed inches from his head. He later said he kept his head down and told the man, "I've got you, don't move." The train stopped. The cars cleared his body by less than an inch. Both men survived. When Autry was asked why he did it, he said, "I just saw someone who needed help. I did what I thought was right." Wesley Autry is not a superhero. He is not a soldier or a firefighter. He is an ordinary man who made a choice in an extraordinary moment. And that choice is the key to understanding resistance. In every psychological experiment on evil, there are always those who resist. In Milgram's experiment, 35% of participants refused to continue. They looked at the shock generator, heard the screams, and walked away. In the Stanford prison experiment, some guards refused to participate in the worst abuses. They found ways to be kind to prisoners, to slip them extra food, to look away when they could have enforced the rules. These resistors were not extraordinary. They were not morally superior. They simply made a different choice. And their example proves that resistance is always possible. The hero's choice is not about grand gestures. It is about small acts of defiance against the pressure of the situation. It is about refusing to dehumanize the person in front of you. It is about questioning the authority that tells you to do something your conscience rejects. It is about accepting responsibility for your own actions instead of handing it to someone else. The psychologist Philip Zimbardo, after a lifetime of studying evil, turned his attention to heroism. He founded the Heroic Imagination Project, dedicated to understanding what makes ordinary people act heroically. His conclusion is simple: heroes are not born, they are made. They are ordinary people who have trained themselves to recognize the moments when a choice must be made and to act before fear can paralyze them. Heroism requires 3 things. First, awareness. You must notice the situation. You must see that something is wrong, that help is needed, that the moment is asking something of you. Second, responsibility. You must accept that you are the one who can act. You cannot wait for someone else. You cannot assume that authority will fix the problem. You must say, "I am responsible." Third, courage. You must act, even when you are afraid. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is fear that has said yes. Wesley Autry was afraid. He later admitted that he thought he might die, but he acted anyway. That is the hero's choice. You do not need to jump onto subway tracks to be a hero. You need to say no when the group says yes. You need to speak up when the room is silent. You need to see the human face when everyone else sees a label. These are small acts. They happen in ordinary moments, and they are the only defense against the machinery of evil. The devil counts on your passivity. He counts on your belief that someone else will act. He counts on your fear of standing alone. But the hero's choice is always available. Not because you are special, because you are human. And humans, even ordinary ones, can choose to be the light in the darkness. The question is not whether you are capable of heroism. The question is whether you will recognize the moment when it is asked of you, and whether you will have the courage to say yes. The devil's greatest trick: evil disguised as good. The writer Charles Baudelaire once said that the devil's greatest trick is convincing the world he does not exist. This line has been repeated so often that it has become almost cliché. But Baudelaire was only half right. The devil has a second trick, even more effective than the first: convincing the world he is the good guy. This is the deeper deception. Not that evil is absent, but that evil is actually virtue. Not that darkness has disappeared, but that darkness has rebranded itself as light. Not that the devil has left the stage, but that he has put on a mask and taken a bow. How does this work? Consider the whispers that come in moments of temptation. They do not sound evil. They sound reasonable. They sound compassionate. They sound like common sense. Just do what makes you happy. Life is too short to deny yourself. Times have changed. We live in a new world with new rules. The old morality doesn't apply anymore. Everyone else is doing it. Why should you be the only one holding yourself back? You obey no one. You are the god of your own life. Your only duty is to yourself. These are the devil's arguments, and they are persuasive because they contain fragments of truth. Yes, life is short. Yes, times change. Yes, conformity is a trap. Yes, autonomy is valuable. But the devil takes these partial truths and twists them into justifications for selfishness, for cruelty, for the abandonment of conscience. The devil does not ask you to become a monster. He asks you to become reasonable, to become practical, to become tolerant of your own small sins. And once you have convinced yourself that the sin is not really a sin, that the wrong is not really wrong, that the line you are crossing was never valid in the first place, you are already lost. The greatest trick of all is making evil feel like liberation. Before you sin, God seems like the accuser, and the devil seems like your defender. God says no, and you feel constrained. The devil says yes, and you feel free. But after you have sinned, after the choice is made, and the consequences begin to unfold, the roles reverse. God becomes your defender, offering forgiveness and a way back. And the devil becomes your accuser, whispering that you are beyond hope, that you are too far gone, that you might as well go further. This is the pattern. First, the permission, then the condemnation. First, the friend, then the prosecutor. God does not say, "Do this or you will be punished." God says, "Do this because it will do you good." The law is not a restriction, it is a map. The commandments are not chains, they are guardrails. They keep you from driving off the cliff, while the devil whispers that the cliff is actually a shortcut, that the drop is not that far, that you have wings and can fly. The devil's greatest trick is convincing you that evil is good, that cruelty is strength, that selfishness is freedom, that hatred is justice. And once you believe that, you are no longer his victim. You are his volunteer. The only defense is constant vigilance, constant questioning, the willingness to look at your own motivations and ask, am I doing this because it is right, or because I have convinced myself that wrong is right? The devil's mask is beautiful, but if you look closely, you can still see the seams. Faust's salvation, progress, not perfection. At the end of Goethe's great poem, Faust dies. He has lived a life of striving, of searching, of reaching for something beyond the grasp of ordinary human experience. He has made a deal with the devil. He has tasted pleasure and power and knowledge. He has loved and lost and loved again. And now, as an old man, blind and worn, he hears the sound of shovels digging what he believes to be his grave. But the shovels are not digging a grave. They are digging a canal. Faust has envisioned a great work, a land reclaimed from the sea, a community of free people living in prosperity. He hears the labor of the workers and believes in his final moment that this vision is becoming real. He says to the passing instant, "Stay, you are so beautiful." And he dies. Mephistopheles, the devil, reaches for his soul. He believes the bargain is complete. Faust has experienced the moment of ultimate bliss. The contract is sealed. Hell awaits. But Faust is saved. Not because he was sinless. He was not. Not because he kept his side of the bargain. He did not. Not because he was better than other men. He was not. Faust is saved because he never stopped striving. He never gave in to idleness. He never settled for the comfort of the achieved. He never said, "I have arrived. I need go no further." He kept reaching, kept working, kept pushing toward a horizon that always receded as he approached. And this constant striving, this refusal to rest in the satisfaction of the accomplished, redeems him. The Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke understood this principle better than almost anyone. After withdrawing from psychotherapy, he wrote a letter to his friend. In it, he said, "If my devils are to leave me, I am afraid my angels will take flight as well." The devils and the angels are not separate. They are the same energy, the same fire, the same passion. The devil tempts, the angel guides, but both are necessary. A man with no devils has no angels. A man who has never been tempted has never learned to resist. A man who has never fallen has never needed to rise. The ancient theologians called this felix culpa, the happy fault, the fortunate fall. Without the fall, there is no redemption. Without the failure, there is no growth. Without the sin, there is no forgiveness. But there is a trap here, a subtle trap. The trap is perfectionism, the belief that you must be sinless to be worthy, the belief that one mistake, one failure, one moment of weakness condemns you forever. This is not the voice of God. This is the voice of the devil, disguised as righteousness, whispering that you are beyond hope, that you might as well give up, that striving is pointless because you will never be good enough. The devil wants you to believe that perfection is the only acceptable standard. Because if perfection is the standard, you will fail. And once you have failed, the devil can convince you that failure is final. But the truth is different. The truth is that wholeness is not perfection. Wholeness includes imperfection. The self, the totality of who you are, contains both light and shadow, both virtue and flaw, both the angel and the devil. There is no psychic wholeness without imperfection. Only gods make something perfect. Human beings make progress. Faust was saved because he never gave up, not because he never sinned. He sinned constantly. He made terrible choices. He caused suffering, but he kept moving. He kept trying. He kept reaching for something better than what he had. And that reaching, that perpetual striving toward the good, even when he failed to reach it, was enough. The same is true for you. You will not become perfect. You will not eliminate your shadow. You will not outgrow temptation, but you can keep striving. You can keep choosing the good, even when you sometimes choose the bad. You can keep getting up, even when you fall. You can keep saying yes to growth, even when the devil whispers that growth is impossible. This is Faust's salvation. This is yours. Not perfection, progress, not sinlessness, striving, not arrival. The journey. And the journey, no matter how many times you stumble, is always worth taking. The Apocalypse and Enantiodromia, the return of the opposites. The Book of Revelation is a strange and violent vision. It speaks of 1,000 years of peace, of Satan bound and thrown into a bottomless pit, of Christ reigning with his saints. It is a vision of final victory. Good has triumphed. Evil is chained. The story is over. But then comes a disturbing detail. After the 1,000 years, Satan must be released. He must be free to deceive the nations once more. The text does not explain why. It simply states that this will happen, as if it were an inviolable law of the universe. The psychologist Carl Jung saw in this detail the operation of a fundamental psychological principle. He called it enantiodromia, a Greek term meaning a running toward the opposite. It is the law by which every extreme generates its opposite. Too much light creates darkness. Too much good creates evil. Too much order creates chaos. Jung wrote, "The coming of the Antichrist is not just a prophetic prediction. It is an invariable psychological law whose existence brought John, the author of Revelation, a sure knowledge of the impending enantiodromia." This is not mysticism, it is observation. Look at history. Every empire that believed itself eternal fell. Every ideology that claimed absolute truth collapsed into its opposite. Every age of extreme piety was followed by an age of extreme license. The pendulum swings. It always swings. And the farther it swings in one direction, the farther it must swing back. The same law operates within the individual psyche. A person who represses their shadow will eventually be overwhelmed by it. A person who denies their capacity for evil will find that evil erupting in ways they cannot control. A person who strives for absolute purity will discover, often to their horror, that purity has a dark twin. The book of Revelation had to include the release of Satan because John, the author, understood something about the nature of good and evil that later theologians forgot. They are not separate. They are opposites, yes, but opposites belong together. You cannot have light without dark, up without down, good without evil, and you cannot chain one forever without the other eventually breaking free. Jung put it this way: "We must beware of thinking of good and evil as absolute opposites. They are halves of a paradoxical whole." This is not relativism. It is not saying that good and evil are the same. They are not. But they are interdependent. The one defines the other. The possibility of evil is the condition for the possibility of good. A world without the capacity for darkness would also be a world without the capacity for light. It would be a world without choice, without freedom, without meaning. The 1,000 years of peace are real. They are necessary. They are the rest that follows labor, but they are not final. The final state is not the absence of evil. The final state is the integration of opposites, the awareness that both light and dark belong to the whole, and the wisdom to choose the light while knowing the dark. This is what the mystics call the unio oppositorum, the union of opposites. It is not a state where evil no longer exists. It is a state where you are no longer torn apart by the battle between them. You stand at the center, you see both poles, and you choose, consciously, freely, knowing that the choice is yours, and that the opposite will always be there, waiting for you to forget. Satan must be released after the 1,000 years, because the human soul cannot bear the absence of the opposite. We need the adversary to remind us why we chose what we chose. We need the tempter to keep us humble. We need the darkness to make the light visible. The apocalypse is not the end of the story. It is the pattern of the story. Light gives way to dark. Dark gives way to light. The pendulum swings. And the wise person learns to stand at the center, feeling the motion without being thrown by it. That is the goal. Not the defeat of evil, but the transcendence of the battle. To be at the border between yin and yang, no longer at the mercy of the opposites. Free. We are all sinners, but not slaves. There is a word that has fallen out of favor in modern psychology: sin. It sounds religious. It sounds judgmental. It sounds like something a priest would say while pointing a finger. But the concept that sin names is real, and ignoring it does not make it disappear. Sin is the gap between what you could be and what you are. Sin is the choice of the smaller good over the larger good. Sin is the comfort of the easy path when the hard path would have made you better. Sin is not a stain that makes you unworthy. Sin is a wound that needs healing. And every human being carries this wound. The Christian tradition calls this original sin. The doctrine has been used to shame and control, but its core insight is profound. You are not born perfect. You are born with the capacity for evil already present. Not as a punishment, but as a condition of being human. A fish does not need to learn to swim. It swims by nature. A bird does not need to learn to fly. It flies by instinct. But you, a human being, must learn to be good. It does not come automatically. It is hard. And you fail at it constantly. By definition, you are a sinner. But here is the distinction that changes everything. You are a sinner. You are not a slave to sin. A sinner is someone who sometimes chooses badly, but can choose differently tomorrow. A slave to sin is someone who has lost the power to choose. The alcoholic who cannot decide not to drink. The addict who cannot decide not to use. The abuser who cannot stop the cycle even when they want to. These are not sinners. These are slaves. And the devil's goal is to turn sinners into slaves. The path from sin to slavery is the path of repetition. A choice made once is a choice. A choice made 100 times is a habit. A choice made 1,000 times is a prison. What starts as something small, something you thought you could control, becomes something that controls you. You stop choosing the sin and start being driven by it. Your identity shifts. You are no longer a person who sometimes makes mistakes. You are the mistake. This is the state that the ancient traditions called bondage, and the devil smiles when you enter it, because he knows that a slave does not need to be tempted. The slave tempts himself. But there is good news. The good news is that no one is beyond reach. No sin is final. No fall is permanent. Faust was saved not because he was sinless, but because he never stopped striving. He kept reaching for the good even when he failed to grasp it. He kept trying even when trying seemed pointless. And that striving, that refusal to accept slavery as his identity, that stubborn hope that tomorrow could be different, redeemed him. The doctrine of original sin is not a life sentence. It is a diagnosis. And a diagnosis is not a destiny. You will sin. You will make choices you regret. You will hurt people you love. You will betray your own values in moments of weakness. This is not a prediction of failure. It is a description of the human condition. Every saint has a past. Every sinner has a future. The question is not whether you will fall. You will. The question is whether you will stay down. The difference between the sinner and the slave is the difference between falling and staying fallen. The sinner gets up. The slave has forgotten how. The sinner asks for help. The slave believes he does not deserve it. The sinner accepts forgiveness. The slave clings to shame as if shame were a virtue. Shame says, "You are bad, therefore you cannot change." Guilt says, "You did something bad, but you can do better." Guilt is useful. Guilt is the signal that you have strayed from your values. Guilt motivates change. But shame is a poison. Shame tells you that the bad thing you did is who you are, that your mistake is your identity, that you are beyond redemption. This is the voice of the devil, accusing you after you have already accused yourself. You are a sinner. You are not a slave. You can choose differently tomorrow. You can ask for help. You can accept grace, whether you call it grace or therapy or community or love. You can get up again and again and again. This is not a license to sin. It is not permission to stop trying. It is a realistic assessment of the human condition and a declaration that the human condition is not hopeless. We are all sinners, but we are not slaves. And as long as you are still breathing, as long as you are still striving, as long as you have not given up on yourself, the story is not over, and the ending has not yet been written. The final question: will you recognize the precipice? We have traveled a long way together, through the laboratories where ordinary people shocked strangers, through the prisons where college students became sadists, through the myths and symbols that have shaped our understanding of darkness for thousands of years, through the minds of monsters and the hearts of heroes. And now, at the end of this journey, we return to where we began. It is 3 a.m. You are alone. The room is dark, and you have just done something you swore you would never do. Who are you now? The answer is not as simple as you once believed. You are not purely good. You are not purely evil. You are both. You are the saint and the sinner, the hero and the monster, the light and the shadow. The question is not whether these opposites exist within you. They do. The question is whether you will recognize them when they stir. The devil's greatest trick is not convincing the world he does not exist. It is convincing you that the evil you are capable of belongs to someone else, that the darkness you feel is only in your imagination, that the line you are approaching is not really there. But you know better now. You have seen the data. You have heard the stories. You have sat with the uncomfortable truth that under the right circumstances, with the right pressure, the right sequence of small steps, almost anyone can become almost anything, including you. This knowledge is not meant to paralyze you with fear. It is meant to wake you up, to make you vigilant, to give you the tools to recognize the precipice before you step off it. Pay attention to the situations that shape you. Question the authority that commands you. Refuse to dehumanize the person who stands before you. Own your shadow before it owns you. Take responsibility for your actions, even when someone else offers to take the blame. And when the whisper comes, the one that sounds so reasonable, so practical, so harmless, remember where that whisper leads. The capacity for evil is real, but so is the capacity for good. The same psychological forces that corrupt can also elevate. The same situations that test you can also strengthen you. The same darkness that threatens to swallow you can become the ground out of which you grow. You will fall. You will make mistakes. You will disappoint yourself and others. This is not a prediction of failure. It is a description of being human. But falling is not the same as staying down. And the measure of your life is not whether you have sinned, but whether you have kept striving. Wesley Autry jumped onto the subway tracks because he saw a man who needed help, and he acted. You will have your own subway tracks, your own moment when the train is coming and the choice must be made. You may not have time to think. You may not have time to calculate. You will only have time to act. Will you recognize that moment? Will you have the courage to say yes? The answer is not written anywhere except in the choices you make, every day, in small ways and large. The story of your life is still being written, and the pen is in your hand.